Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
Welcome to another episode of Cash Plays. Cash Plays, the only podcast to dedicate all its time to talking about cash game poker, cash game strategy, ring game strategy, where the money is really made in playing cards, none of this donkament garbage. Of course, you can leave a voicemail at 877-836-ROAD, 877-836-ROAD, and I depend on your emails, cashplays@pokerroad.com, cashplays@pokerroad.com. And today it's just going to be me, and going to be going over quite a few emails, and going to go over some hand analysis issues. We've been kind of taking emails with general theoretical questions, but we haven't gone over a whole lot of specific hands, and I've chosen a couple of hands that was emailed to me over the last few weeks that I think have been, that relate to some of the concepts that we've talking about. But before we get into some of those emails, there are a couple new things that I want to bring up on the show. And one of them is bet sizing. And this is usually specifically talking about live play. It was just one of the things that I kind of noticed last week. I was looking for some new ideas for the show. And realized that, there was a hand where I had raised it up pre-flop, I think in a steal position in the cutoff, with something like 5-6 of spades. Excuse me. And the guy in the blind had called heads up. And the board came out, really dry. Jack deuce 7 offsuit. And the guy in the blind checked me, and I ended up betting about 80 or 90% of the pot. And my friend and the guy in the blind folded. My friend asked me, why did I bet so much on such a dry board as a continuation bet? And the pattern that I was picking up from a lot of live players who are weak players is that if you're betting half the pot to even sometimes as much as 60, 70% of the pot, they are taking off with all kinds of hands. Like they're going to take off with middle pair. They're going to take off with bottom pair. They might take off with a gut shot, which is fine when you know you have the best hand and you're betting for value. If I have aces on that board, I almost want to get action by betting 50 or 60% of the pot in position against, a middle-ish pair type hand or a bottom pair or some sort of draw. But when making a continuation bet as almost what in essence is a bluff with no showdown value, I actually like a bigger bet so that if the guy calls, I know that he actually has something. I know that he's just not peeling with some sort of garbage. Now, some people might say, well, do you make a small bet on the flop and then double barrel the turn? That's another line that you can take as well. But when I'm usually playing like a deeper stack and I've completely missed the flop, I like to make a bet that looks strong to a weaker player. Again, this is against normal and weak competition. I'm trying to make myself strong. Against a good player, I don't think the bet sizing is going to matter as much. A half pot size bet against decent opponents, I think can get the job done. And they actually might be aware that I'm betting, with a real hand. But against guys that, you don't have a whole lot of respect for, you think you have a big advantage against them, I think to them, what looks like a stronger bet adds actually more fold equity, when in fact, the best line may in fact be to keep the pot smaller. But I'm actually talking about trying to win the hand right then and there on the flop. If you make yourself look strong with a close to pot size bet, I have found that it gets you more fold equity than a smaller bet, even if a smaller bet might be what you think is the best play strategically. If you're looking for maximum fold equity, again, making closer to that pot size bet, really takes it down. It's kind of the opposite of what I endorse on the river. Because, if you're betting for value early on in the hand, and I'm trying to build up a pot with what I think is the best hand, I don't mind smaller bets, because smaller bets are going to allow me to bet bigger on other streets. But on the river, when the pot is basically finalized, when you're only going to get one more bet in unless you're raised, if I think the guy is a station, I'm going to bet bigger so that I can get more value. But early on in the hand, if I think the guy's a station, I don't want to blow him off of my hand, and I don't mind off of his hand, and I don't mind putting in 50 to 75% bets with what I know is the best hand, extracting 75% again on the turn, and then figuring out whatever this guy's going to call on the river. But at the end, I think, we talked about this over the last couple of weeks. At the end, I think people lose value when they could have bet more on the river against calling stations, but choose not to. They choose to bet smaller to absolutely guarantee themselves that they'll get some money in the pot. And sometimes it's almost laughable when I see a guy, bet $350 into a $2,500 pot. Because, they're winning $350 at that time. But if they could bet $1,000 into a $2,500 pot and get called 80% of the time, then their overall expectation with that particular bet is $800 versus 100% of the time getting called with $350. So again, it's almost I almost play the hand differently in the beginning on the earlier streets as opposed to the end. But again, the point of the bet sizing issue is if you're looking for a fold equity, especially heads up or against two guys on a dry board like a Jack 7 deuce, I actually like a bigger bet to get a guy off of, say, middle pair, pocket eights, pocket nines. Now, this is for you guys that usually don't like to double barrel or triple barrel hands. For people that are comfortable double barreling, triple barreling, you can take the same line. You can bet half, whatever your standard bet is on the flop, and then just continue on betting, the turn and the river. But for guys that don't really want to put more money in past just one street or aren't really comfortable in making a lot of big bluffs, again, I think that is absolutely maximizing your fold equity by doing that earlier on in the hand. Got an email, and again, we've been talking a lot about draws and how to play draws, and just want to go over in capped games a little bit about open shoving from up front versus check raising. And I know I've talked about this on episode 1 or episode 2, but it's really important. And I think a lot of the listeners play at a level of maybe, a $300 cap game or a $500 cap game, where you're going to be in awkward spots sometimes against a shorter stack. Say you've called the raise, and the effective stacks in the hand are less than 2 pot size bets. Now, remember what effective stack means. Effective stack basically means whoever the short stack is. If I've got $1,000 and my opponent has 300, the effective stacks in the hand is 300, because that's really all that we're dealing with, his 300. So I'll give you an example. Say the pot is $100 and the effective stack is $200. Again, up to about a 2 pot size bets. If you flop a big draw from up front, a hand that you have decided that you are absolutely going to go with, straight draw, flush draw, combination pair, straight draw, or a pair flush draw, normally you actually want to come out and make a bet and take down the pot right now against what you think there's a good chance against a non-pair hand. Now, especially if you don't have a pair and a flush draw, let's just say, straight draw, gut shot, and a flush draw, against a guy that is basically almost always continuation betting his hands. So let's say you think there's a very good chance he's got ace king, and you've got something like a Jack 10 suited, and the board comes out 7-8 deuce with 2 of your suits. So you've got a gut shot, straight draw, you've got a flush draw, and you actually have overcards to the board, but the overcards don't really mean as much, but your hand is live against a non-pair hand. You would actually, even though you are a favorite, about a 2-to-1 favorite in the hand, draw, no pair versus no pair, no draw, you would actually rather come out and bet and win that pot 100% of the time against ace-king. If your opponent turns over his hand, and you see that he has ace-king, what line would you want to take? Well, if you check and he makes a continuation bet and you check raise him, a lot of times he's going to pot commit himself and he's going to be forced to call. And even though you are about 63, 37-ish with that type of a hand, flush draw, gut shot, no pair against high cards, no pair, you're basically, what you're ended up doing is the pot's going to be $300 and you're going to have to call 200 to win, because remember, the pot's 100 now. You check to him, he makes a bet, you check raise him all in, and he ends up calling. He has 200 left in his stack. So you actually are committing 200 of your stack to win 300 in the pot, getting about 1.5 to 1. And again, as a 63-37 situation in the hand, you are just running a little bit over. I mean, you do have equity in the pot. You only need to have about 60-40 equity. However, you would always rather win $100 100% of the time. Remember, we're making it easy, so we're flipping over our opponent's hand so that we can figure out the ideal line on how to play. And in that case, if we know that if we bet on the flop, he'll always fold non-paired high cards, we would rather take that line because we would rather win $100, which is the pot, 100% of the time, instead of risking 200 to win 300 and only winning 63% of the time. Now, there are unique situations where your draws can be so big that sometimes you actually can lay those odds in a sense where, let's say, you've got 4 or 5 of spades, and the board comes out deuce of spades, 3 of spades, 5 of hearts. So you've got top pair and an open-ended straight flush draw. In that case, you're such a big favorite against 2 unpaired high cards that sometimes, I think I did it out. It's like 80-20 or something like that you can lay that type of odds where you'd actually want to put $200 in to try to win 300. But again, you're always, in those other situations, better to win the $100 100% of the time. It's actually a better bet than trying to lay 200 to win 300, only 63% as a 63% favorite. So when you do flop a draw, and I know a lot of you guys play in those cap games, and you, again, have decided that you are going to go with the hand, I think that betting to maximize fold equity is the best way to go about playing the hand. Now, if the guy has an overpair, it doesn't matter because it's going to go in anyways. If you check raise him, it's going in. If you bet, he's going to raise you and you're going to call, it's going in. You don't want to allow your opponent to play more optimally, though, by checking a big draw and pot committing himself with 2 high unpaired cards. Because in essence, you check it over to him and he bets 75. You now check raise him all in. Well, it's $125 for him to call, and now you've bloated the pot up to 75 plus 75, 150 to 250. Situations arise where a guy is going to call there with getting 2 to 1 with 2 high cards. The stack sizes. I've seen situations where a guy makes a mistake where he checks it over to the guy and the guy bets, and the guy's inherently going to get 3 or 4 to 1. Because, and that normally happens is when your stack is so small. Let's say that, you have less than a pot size bet left. Let's say the pot's 300 and you've got under 300. Well, if you check it over to him and the guy bets 2/3 of the pot as a continuation bet, $200, and now you check raise him all in, well, now the pot's $600, 100 for him to call. You're forcing him to call with any 2 cards. But if you make an open shove or an open bet, then you don't have to worry about your opponent getting pot stuck. And again, a lot of people, I don't think, understand that concept, and they don't play their draws in that correct manner. So think about that the next time you have a situation where you have less than, say, 1 or 2 pot size bets, and what do you really want to happen? Because if you decide that your hand is strong enough that it's going to go against an overpair anyways, then you might as well try to make a bet that gets 2 unpaired high cards to fold. Again, because you want to win. You're not ahead right now. You just have a draw, and you want to win what is in the pot 100% of the time. First email of the day here comes from Stephen from Vancouver in British Columbia. And he says, I was just listening to the 2+2 podcast, and they were talking about the 5-10 rule being incorrect against a wide range. Can you explain why? And is this different for full ring versus 6-max? Thank you, Stephen, for the email. Now, the 5-10 rule that he's talking about, I cut this email down as 10% of your stack, you wanting to have 10% of the raise size to call with pocket pairs, and at least 5% in your stack of the raise size to call with suited connectors. I call it 10 times 20 times rule. Or with a small pocket pair in a 5-10 game, if a guy opens to 50, I'm going to call there. In order for me to call, I have to have 500 in my stack, and my opponent has to have 500 in his stack. The effective stacks have to be at least 500. If he opens for 50 and I've got 6-7 suited, the effective stacks have to be 20 times. They have to be $1,000. I call it 10 times, 20 times. Some people call it 5%, 10%, whatever. The point Steven's making, and I think what they were talking about on the 2+2 podcast, is against a guy that has a very wide range of pre-flop raising, it is incorrect to use those numbers. You actually have to almost drastically increase the effective stacks, because the times that you are flopping a set or flopping your hand with a suited connector or a draw that's strong enough to go with, that pre-flop raiser is going to have a much, much weaker hand than a guy who, say, only raises a small percentage of the time with, say, usually big pocket pairs or usually high cards. The issue of full ring versus six max, I was actually watching a training video, I don't remember, on one of the sites, and the instructor brought up a good point. When you're playing six max online, and a lot of people are always open raising with your hands, say you open raise with pocket fours, and you get 3-bet out of the blinds, you need much more than 10 times what is the 3-bet size, or in this case 10%, to call with your pocket pair, because the ranges online are so big. People squeeze so much. The other thing that I learned too was that if you do flop a set against an overpair, you're losing, I think it's 15 to 20% of the time anyways. So your odds really, really have to increase when you're playing against wider ranges of pre-flop raising, whether that be 3-betting or just the initial pre-flop. Now, online full ring, I don't have a whole ton of experience playing online full ring. The ranges are obviously going to be a bit smaller than 6 max, but you just got to remember, when you're trying to call with a suited connector or a pocket pair, remember the 10 times 20 times rule, and if the guy is looser than average, you'd probably want to increase those numbers to maybe 15, 30, something like that. I mean, it's very, very difficult to win a big hand if you're calling with a suited connector against a guy that's opening with a wide range, because most of the time you're not going to flop anything. Remember, it's hold'em. Most of the time no one flops anything. So for you to be able to flop basically what is a monster draw or a 2-pair plus hand, and for that other guy to have something big to pay you off, is very, very slim. Situations occur in 6 max games where you might call with small pocket pairs or suited connectors against a 3-better, but you are really planning to get it in extremely light on the flop. And normally your suited connectors, you want to be doing them with at least probably 6-7 or 8-9 suited, just so that you can have some high card value, so that if you flop top pair, you have some value. A hand like 3-4, it just doesn't play that well all that well heads up. But if you're opening and you want to play a hand, if you're opening with 6-7 suited and a guy's 3-betting you out of the blind with a wide range, normally you're not going to have 20 times, but if you call there, you've got to be willing to get it in with pretty much almost any pair, very, very light draws, because again, now you calling with your suited connector, you're basically not playing the value of your hand. You're playing the value of your position, and you know that the guy is, 3-betting light. Which is, part of the reason when Simoleus was on the show, he talked about why he doesn't necessarily like to 3-bet with suited connectors, because those hands play so great, stack size to raise size. If you bloat a pot up where you're getting more than 10 or 5 or 10% of your money in pre-flop with a suited connector, well, now you're really no longer playing the value specifically of your cards. Those specific types of hands play really well with a certain stack size. So again, if you're going to call a 3-bet with a small pocket pair or a suited connector in position online, you're not doing it just because of the value of your hand. You definitely have to get it in light. So again, ask yourself, how tight is this guy? If it's an extremely tight guy, then yeah, you definitely want to be calling with those types of hands. But if it's a loose aggressive guy, you're just not making enough money long term to be using the 5-10 rule. So I hope that helps you out, Steven. Another email comes in. He says, what kind of edge does Poker Tracker give you with a heads-up display online? And I think it gives you a big edge. I mean, Poker Tracker itself is a great tool to use to go back and review hands, review certain situations. But if you use a heads-up display like a Poker Ace or some other heads-up display, and you're playing a lot of hands online, if you don't have these tools, I think you're at a severe disadvantage. Just the sheer fact that, probably the three most important numbers in online poker, VPIP, voluntary put money in the pot, that percentage, pre-flop raise percentage, total aggressiveness factor. Those three numbers, you can tag down a player, as a loose aggressive player, as a tight aggressive player, loose passive. I think it's very, very important to have those numbers. And if you get more in detail with Poker Tracker and heads-up display, then you can start looking at, continuation bet percentage. I mean, a lot of guys at the smaller levels, I don't play a lot of no limit cash online. But when I do, if I'm playing a 6-mac, 50 cent, $1, a lot of these guys are auto betting the flop. A lot of times, if you've got a few thousand hands data mined against them, you can look and they're continuation betting 80, 90% of all flops. So if a board comes out dry, high rag, king rag, that's probably one of the best boards where you can just take it away from them with a check raise, because they're so often missing that type of board. And they're so often continuation betting that it becomes profitable just to take it away from them with total air. And if you're not using a heads-up display and you're not using any type of information, you don't know, basically what these guys are doing. You've got no information on these guys. Remember, live play, you go and play against a guy, you look at him, you pick up some patterns. Online, you don't have that ability. And to be able to use computer-assisted programs to help you find patterns, I think is a great advantage. So if you're playing online and you're not using Poker Tracker and heads-up displays, you are behind in the game. We are going to take some more emails. Get an email from my buddy Dave Tuckman, who's over in London. He used to host Live at the Bike with me, so stick around. We'll be back right after this on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays.
Previously on Poker Road Radio.
A lot of people out there would love to hear maybe one or two great anecdotes that you've got about Stu Unger. And there's so many. I know there's so many.
There really are so many. I mean, Stewie, people ask me all the time, how do you think he'd do out on the World Poker Tour these days? I believe with all my heart, he'd not only be the biggest star out here, he'd be the biggest star by a landslide. And I truly believe that. I think he would be the best performer on the World Poker Tour. And had the World Poker Tour been around when Stewie was here, I think he could have stayed off the drugs and he'd have been a top-notch rock star.
Don't miss a moment. Tune in to Poker Road Radio and get all the action from the tournament circuit.
Cash Plays.
And we are back right here on Cash Plays. I am Bart Hanson, and we're going to get to an email here sent by Andrew. He says, "Hi Bart, I have a question regarding you saying not to push your draws with zero fold equity. Have you ever considered doing it for metagame purposes? Say you have a 12 to 14 out draw with what appears to have no fold equity. If someone sees you put the money in with what look like no fold equity, he can make them stack off lighter in the future when you have a hand. Say someone would normally stack off with an overpair or better, but he sees you make the shove, and now top pair, top kicker, and even top pair, good kicker enter his range of stacking off with." Well, thank you very, very much for the interview, Andrew. It's interesting, Andrew. I don't buy into making plays for metagame reasons at lower levels of no limit. And even some of the levels that I play at, 5-10 no limit, it might start to creep in there. But when you're playing capped games, there aren't a whole lot of players that are paying attention. where straightforward poker isn't just gonna win it. And I wouldn't be making big moves for metagame purposes when a lot of people aren't going to even they don't even know what you're doing anyways. But I think you do make a good point. And I actually remember a hand I saw when I was at the PCA when I was playing, I think it was 10 1/4, where, a guy had been shoving with his draws a ton of the time. And basically, his villain in this particular hand called him with bottom pair. And I think it was Victor Ramden that was just he was playing loose aggressive and he was shoving his draws. And this time he just had a huge draw. He had like a 15 out draw and he was a little bit short stack and the guy made a standard continuation bet and he shoved and the guy called with bottom pair. I think the guy had raised it up with 4 or 5 suited and the board had come out like 9-6-5 with 2 diamonds and Victor had 7-8 of diamonds and the guy called with 4-5. And I'm not saying it's a good call, but I'm saying that, again, for metagame purposes, yeah, in fact, it worked. I mean, Victor got this guy to call him so light. So I like the idea. I think you bring up another point as to why sometimes to push with the 12 to 14 out draw with no fold equity for metagame purposes. I just don't think that playing a hand for metagame purposes is proper at the middle to lower levels. And, you can take that for what it's worth, whatever. I mean, a lot of people don't consider 2-4 no limit online to be the middle level. That's a higher level. Again, my experience is live up to 5-5 no limit. I wouldn't be making moves for metagame purposes unless you really, really know the player and you play with them a lot and you think it's actually going to do something. In that case, then by all means, go for it. Thank you for the email, Andrew. David Tuckman, my buddy from Live at the Bike who used to host with me, he actually did the $1 Million Cash Game. If anybody's watched that online, I know that you can't, it hasn't been on US TV yet, but I know that there's all kinds of sites that have been hosting it. And it has been on Sky Sports in England. He's the American guy that was feigning the British accent. He's got a question for me. He says, I was playing in a local game, 5 pound, no limit. Now, pounds are about $2 a piece, so you can do the equivalent. He says, I don't know any of the players, although I saw this one player stack off with an overpair when it was obvious he was behind. Anyways, here goes. Full ring game. I'm on the button with 7-5 of diamonds. Under the gun raises to 25 pounds and 3 players call. I'm 1,300 deep. Most of the table is around where I'm at. I see the flop and both blinds end up calling. Yes, 7 players call. Pot is 175. So again, we got a situation where we've got 7-5 of diamonds. We've got a lot of dead money in the middle before it comes to us. It's a 25-pound raise, and we've got 1,300 behind. I think we can easily call here, just evaluating pre-flop. Again, using that 20 times, I would probably call here, maybe with even as little as a $400, 400-pound stack here, with some dead money in front of me and us having position. With us having 1,300 pounds in front of me, it's an easy call. So obviously pre-flop is fine here. Multi-way action, 175 pounds in the pot. The flop falls 9-7-5 with 2 spades. The under the gun player bets 150 pounds and 3 players call. And I actually emailed Dave back and I was like, wow, what a crazy awkward spot here. So obviously this guy is representing an overpair as the under the gun better. He's basically almost bet full pot here on the flop. And we've flopped bottom 2 pair on a ridiculously drawy board, 9-7-5. My first instinct when I look at this hand is I say I don't like it. Because the problem is that our stack is so awkward in comparison to what the pot size now is. The pot is 775 pounds, and it's over to us, 150 to call. If we make that call, it's 925, and we have about 1,150 left. I can't really see us making anything less than a shove raise here. We really only have just about over a pot size bet here as a raise. And I just don't like the fact that there are 3 people in there. I think if we shove here with bottom 2, we are really not protecting our stack. I think it's really a little reckless. Again, normally at smaller levels, not that this is a smaller level, I mean, 1,300 pounds, that's like $2,600. You would think that somebody would raise there with the set with a 2-pair hand with 6-8, with such a draw-heavy board, somebody should raise. But people still slow play like 8-6, 8-6 of spades, something like that. I think it's way tight to fold. So, what do you do? If you're not going to shove all in here, which I think is a little reckless, and you're not going to fold, when I first looked at this hand, I think my contention is, and the more and more I look at it, I like to call here and almost peel one off. I'm going to call the 150 here. And I'm going to be looking, obviously, for a non-spade turn card. The board is 9-7-5. I'm going to be looking for a non-8, a non-3, any type of straightening card, like if the guy has 10-8, a non-6 or a non-jack, 8, 6, 3, and non-spade. And that's basically just under half the deck. So I think that we can commit 150 pounds here on the turn to see what happens. And if we do get a safe card on the turn, and let's say it's a low blank card or a high blank card, the other thing we've got to be worried about too is if it comes a high blank card, it might set the guy who's under the gun with the overpair. Because we think he's got an overpair, but he could have 10s, jacks, queens, kings, or aces. But I think we're just going to have to go with it. So if a high blank card comes here, we've got to evaluate what happens. We've got to evaluate what the under the gun guy does. Let's say the turn comes an offsuit king or an offsuit queen, and he comes out and bets again. Now, if we see middle guys, let's say that one of the middle guys now ships it. Remember, 3 guys called in between. I think we just dump the hand. There's a lot of things that have to go right for us, I think, to win this hand. But I think with 150 over to us, and the pot is 775, we're getting almost 5-1. I'm going to peel here, and a number of things have to happen for me to continue on with the hand. Best case scenario, I see a total blank. The under the gun guy makes a big bet, maybe makes a shove, and everybody folds, and then we can easily call. Or the guy makes another bet, and a guy in the middle just calls, because at that point there, I don't give credit for a guy to slow play, 2 streets there with 8-6. If we see a blank and the under the gun guy bets again, and a middle guy makes a raise, I think we're out. If the under the gun guy checks and a couple middle guys become active, I think we're out. But we're getting 5-1. The interesting thing here is that I actually played a hand like this a couple months ago at the bike. If you look at the hand ranges here, and we say that the under the gun guy's got an overpair, and obviously we're sitting there with bottom 2, we don't actually have great equity against a guy with a 2-way draw here. Let's say a guy has a straight draw and a flush draw, gut shot straight draw and a flush draw, or flush draw and a pair. If you take that hand with the overpair against our hand, we actually have, I think, in the low 30% of equity. Overpair versus pair and a flush draw versus bottom 2. I mean, look at the outs, to beat those 2 guys. If we stick it all in with those 2 hands, I mean, it's going to have to come brick. So you're really not in a great spot in the sense what you look at. Well, I could have the best hand now. Well, maybe you could have the best hand, and I still think that I would make the contention that 20 to 30% of the time when those 3 players are called in between, someone's got a better hand than you. Someone might be slow playing. So here I peel with bottom 2, and then I see what happens. Remember, protecting your stack better than protecting your hand. It's definitely an interesting spot. Anytime you flop, I think, a 2-pair hand where you think someone else has an overpair on a drawy board with multi-way action, you definitely have to proceed with caution. Thank you very, very much for the email, Dave, and good luck with everything you're doing. Last email of the day here comes from Shah. And the reason why I picked this email was because I think it has to do with the way ahead, way behind concept that we talked about and playing against kind of passive players. This comes from the PokerStars full ring game. And it is a 1-2 game. And our hero is in mid-position 1 with ace-king offsuit. Under the gun limps in for $2. Hero raises it up to 10, which I'm assuming is a standard raise. And under the gun calls. So, okay. Hero here, we have $150 in our stack. The under the gun has us covered with just over 190. He's open limped. We've popped it up to 10, and he's called. We're heads up, and we have position. The pot is $23. The board comes out, Jack 6-4 with 2 spades. Under the gun checks. Hero bets 16. Under the gun calls. I don't mind the standard continuation bet. There are a couple of spades out there. It's a situation where it's pretty good board texture to make a continuation bet. I think sometimes with a hand as strong as ace-king, you bet that board and the guy folds and you're like, oh, good, I'm happy. But sometimes ace-king is such a strong hand in terms of being the non-nut or the nut non-pair hand that if you're betting a hand like ace-10, ace-9, or king-queen off of that board, you're losing the possibility of extracting a couple more streets of value later on. So sometimes with ace-king, I actually like to check it through just because if I do catch up, I can make more money on the guy if he shares our cards. But I don't mind the continuation bet. You bet there, you get that smells to me online like this guy has just limped in with a pocket pair. So, if he's got pocket 3s or pocket 7s, I don't mind a bet there and just get him off the hand. So the guy bets 16. Under the gun calls. Well, now the pot's $55. The turn here is the king of spades. So the board is Jack, 6, 4, king. You've got ace-king with the ace of spades. Under the gun checks. Our hero decides to bet 30 now. Now, this is just a spot here with the ace of spades where I think I'm almost always taking a card. If we think, and again, way ahead, way behind, a perfect example here. If we think that the guy has a spade draw, well, he's just gotten there. The third spade has come out on the turn. We have the nut spade draw. So if we bet and get check raised, we've really put ourselves in an awkward spot here. If the guy just had a jack, or if he has pocket 9s or pocket 8s, and we bet on a third spade turn overcard, then of course he's going to fold. I think this is a perfect example here if you had total air and made a bet here on the flop and the guy called, that on the turn, you just hope he doesn't have spades and you second barrel it because it's such a scary card. But with ace-king and the ace of spades, I think this is a perfect spot here to check, and you might extract value if a non-spade comes on the river against a hand like a queen-jack or a jack-10. But the hero here bets 30, and now the guy check raises up to 70. Now at this point, when you bet 30 and the guy makes it 70, the pot is $155 and it's $40 for you to call. I really, really don't like it. I know you look at it and you're like, well, I've got the ace of spades. I'm going to get about, 3.5 to 1. But this guy is almost, he's representing the fact that he has a flush now. So you might have 7 outs with 1 card to come. Remember, you have the worst type of draw. You need a 4 spade to come in to make your draw. And a lot of times, guys might make a small flush on the turn. Then a 4 spade comes out. They check you. Now you bet and they fold. So here I think it's actually a rather easy fold. And you basically have gotten pot stuck. If you call now, and the guy moves in, I think the pot's like, it's going to be something like $200 and he's got $62 left. Because the action on the river, the hero actually called. Pot's 195, under the gun bet 62. And the hero now getting what is more than 4 to 1 makes a call with $54 left in his stack. And the guy ended up actually having king-jack for top 2, which is a very, very strange way for king-jack to play that hand. Because in reality, when he check raises the turn, I would think that he really should only be getting called there by a hand like a flush. Although I guess at these levels, maybe he's trying to get value against 2 aces with the ace of spades, or in this case, ace-king with the ace of spades. But that is an absolute perfect time right there to make a check on the turn with your nut flush draw. Let's say that board was dry. Let's say the board had come out jack 6-4 and you made a continuation bet with ace-king and the guy called. Now the turn's a king and you have ace-king here. Again, another spot here where if you bet and you get check raised, I think you must fold. But if you bet, you're going to probably get 9s or 10s to fold the hand, maybe a weak jack to fold the hand. But if you check there on the turn, you can extract value on the river. Again, with the spade draw, I think it's almost an obvious check the turn there. And I think it's almost, you almost got to, I mean, even though it's almost like a min-raise, I think you almost got to fold, depending on how aggro the player is, to the check raise. Remember, this is full ring, so it doesn't play as crazy as 6-max. But I hope that helps you out there, Shah. And I do want to get into some more specific hand analysis as these shows go along. And we had a couple good hands this week, so hope everybody followed that. I am going to be continuing to play probably 5-10 at the bike this week, maybe some 10-20 at Commerce. And we'll be back here next week with another episode of Cash Plays. Everybody have a good week.